Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the fairy tales you thought you knew are reborn as haunting legends. Tonight, we begin our descent into the cursed halls of a royal family plagued by secrets, sorrow, and a sister the world forgot. This is the 12 Princesses. The castle of Veldenmoor was a towering fortress of alabaster stone, its turrets crowned with banners stitched in gold thread, and its stained glass windows glowing with tales of saints and monarchs long dead. From the outside, it was a place of splendour, wealth, power, and tradition, etched into every archway and flagstone, but within it was hollow, and beneath it was cursed. King Eric of Veldenmoor had 12 daughters, each more beautiful than the last. They were praised across the continent for their grace, their wit, and their inexplicable melancholy. They were never seen laughing in the garden, never caught gossiping in corners, always composed, always drifting, but the king kept a secret that weighed heavier than any crown. There had once been 13. Her name was Iselda. She had been the eldest, stillborn, according to the midwife, her body taken from the queen's chamber before she even cried. No death bell was rung, no grave was marked, only the queen wept until her body gave way to the strain of silence, and she never bore children again. The other 12 came not from her, but from lesser queens, political matches, and concubines, all of them beautiful, none of them loved, and yet the 13 daughters all looked alike, too alike. The nurses would whisper that the girls carried the same eyes, the same long black lashes, the same slender hands, like paper dolls cut from the same cursed pattern. When asked about their mother, the girls would only smile and say she lived in the East Tower, sick with sleep. But there was no East Tower. The king had locked that wing years ago. Then the shoes began to wear out. It began in the spring of Eric's 33rd year as king. At first, it was merely puzzling. Every morning, the maids would find all 12 pairs of the princess's slippers scuffed and torn, as though they had danced all night in the courtyard. But the girls were always in bed, pale, silent, resting. Eric summoned doctors, seamstresses, exorcists. They found no disease, no deception, no demon, and yet the slippers came apart every dawn, soles shredded like leaves under a cartwheel. One physician, in his desperation, dosed the girls with laudanum and chained their bedchambers shut. Still, the next morning, 12 pairs of shoes lay broken on the floor, and one of the princesses had fingernail scratches down her arms, as though something had dragged her from the bed. The king tried silence, then prayers, then threats, and when all failed, he declared a decree. Any man who could discover where the princesses went at night would win the hand of one and half the kingdom, fail and be put to death. They came in droves, suitors, knights, sons of noblemen. None lasted more than 3 days. They were found wandering the halls, eyes bloodshot, whispering about music they couldn't stop hearing. One tore out his own tongue, claiming it would keep her from climbing into his throat to speak through him. Another set fire to his room and danced in the flames until his skin split like old parchment. But not one could explain where the princesses went. Not one mentioned the 13th girl until Jacob arrived. Jacob was no noble. He had no sword, no titles, no name to bind him to a throne. He was a deserter, a gravedigger, and a man with nothing left but bone-deep fear and a strange knack for seeing the things others wouldn't, or couldn't, or wouldn't dare to admit. He was dragged in by the guards after being caught digging too close to the royal tombs. Looking for ghosts, the captain had sneered, boot pressed into Jacob's chest. Jacob had smiled through broken teeth. Aren't we all? The king was desperate. He let Jacob try. Jacob didn't ask for gold, didn't demand a daughter's hand. He only asked for one thing. Let me sleep in the floorboards beneath their room. At first, the request was laughed off, then questioned, then reluctantly granted. That night, the sisters were led to their chamber with candles glowing, hair brushed down their backs like dark waterfalls, eyes cast downward as always. Jacob crawled into the cramped space below, no bigger than a coffin. Dust clung to the cobwebs like skin to bone. The air was stale, still. Jacob pressed his ear to the wood above and waited. At first, nothing, just creaking floorboards, the rustle of silk, then a silence deeper than quiet, a hush that made his heart slow in his chest. He could feel it, like something had changed the shape of the room above. A draught where there should be none, a light that pulsed where darkness ought to reign. Then the music began. It wasn't the sound of lutes or harpsichords. No, this was deeper, stranger, like bones clinking together underwater, a rhythm that gnawed at the inside of his skull. Jacob shut his eyes. The wood beneath his fingertips grew colder, then wet. A drop fell onto his cheek. He looked up. The floorboards were bleeding. At first, it was just a line, a single, thin trickle down from a crack above. But soon, the lines multiplied, oozing between the boards, like the room itself had veins. He opened his mouth to shout, but then another sound stopped him. A giggle, not 12 voices, but 13. He counted them, one by one, 12 soft, breathy notes of laughter, and one wrong one, low, crooked, hollow as a crypt. The dancing began. Jacob didn't sleep, not that night, not the next. He listened every time 13 sets of feet moved above his head, even though the world said there were only 12, and always, always, the 13th step sounded closer. By the 4th night, Jacob was changed. His face had thinned, eyes sunk in, and something unspoken crept into his gaze. He left the floorboards and requested an audience with the king. "There's another," he rasped. Another girl, one you never speak of. The king went pale. That name is not spoken here. Jacob only nodded. She wants to be. The throne room seemed to shrink in around them. The fire guttered. Somewhere in the high tower, bells rang, but no hands pulled the ropes. She's bringing them down, Jacob whispered. Down into the place you buried her. And every night she gets closer to remembering her name. He held up one of the princess's shoes, split down the sole, caked in ash. Your daughters are dancing on grave dust. The king refused to speak to Jacob again. After that final audience, Jacob was sent back to the servants' quarters, confined but not dismissed, watched but not imprisoned. He was no longer a suitor, not quite a prisoner, merely tolerated, an unwanted mirror the king refused to look into. Still, the damage had been done. Word spread like a sickness through the stone halls. 13, a forbidden number. Whispers passed between scullery maids and kitchen boys like smuggled bread. Some began leaving offerings at their thresholds. Salt circles, bits of iron, nails crossed and tucked into corners. In the princess's wing, the servants grew scarce. No one wanted to linger, and yet the shoes kept breaking. Each morning, the maids found 12 pairs of slippers lined neatly beneath the ornate canopy beds, still warm, still damp with sweat, smelling faintly of smoke and something sweeter, like burnt sugar. But now, the maids began to notice something else. A 13th pair, small, faint, like shadows stitched from the others, never in the same place twice. Once, it was found beneath the hearth, ash coating its satin bow. Another time, perched atop a wardrobe, toes pointed down. The last time, the youngest maid claimed to have found them in her own bed, tucked against her stomach, as though worn in sleep. She didn't return to work after that. In the dark hollow of the servants' stairwell, Jacob kept a ledger. It wasn't fancy, just a bundle of stained paper bound with string, but he scribbled every detail in it with obsessive care. He no longer watched from the floorboards. That had grown too dangerous. He knew the sound of the 13th step now, the way it clicked just slightly off rhythm, the way it dragged its toe. He could smell the thing too, a copper tang beneath perfume and powder. He'd taken to watching the sisters during the day instead. They moved like broken marionettes, smiling at nothing, turning in perfect unison, as if listening to music no one else could hear. Only the eldest, Princess Linnea, seemed to resist. She held her spine straighter than the others. Her skin was not as pale. Her eyes still blinked, and once, just once, Jacob swore she looked straight at him and mouthed something. Don't. He started leaving notes under their pillows, in books, folded into their slippers. Just questions. Where do you go? Who is she? What did he bury? Why do you dance? Most went unanswered, but then, on the 7th day, he found a single word scrawled on the bottom of a slipper in charcoal. Help. The next night, Jacob followed the music. He timed it carefully. Each night, the castle fell under the same pattern. Torches dimmed. The guards outside the princess's chambers blinked like men already half asleep, and the air grew thick. It was always the same hour, just past the last bell, when the moon hung crooked in the sky and the clouds stopped moving. That was when the music started, but it was quieter now, fainter. It had moved deeper. Jacob followed the sound past the royal chambers, down 3 spiral staircases, and into the cellars beneath the old chapel. There, the stone changed colour, no longer grey, but slick and dark, veined with strange lines like fossilised roots. He passed forgotten crypts, rusted iron gates, and carvings he didn't recognise. 13 stars, 13 eyes, 13 mouths sewn shut. The music pulsed beneath his feet. It led him to a wall, solid, imposing, but wrong. He touched it, and his fingers sank slightly into the stone, as if it were soft as flesh. He pulled back, heart racing, and then he heard it. Not music, not laughter, a voice, small, ragged, a child's voice, barely above a whisper. Jacob. He ran. The next morning, the king summoned him again, not because he wanted to, but because Linnea had spoken. It was the first thing she'd said aloud in months. "She's coming," Linnea had whispered, hands twisted in the hem of her gown. "She's tired of dancing. She wants us to burn it all down." "Who?" the king had asked. "Our sister." The court priest was called. Holy water was flung. Psalms were muttered so quickly they tripped over themselves. Linnea screamed when the incense touched her skin. That night, Linnea did not join the others for their descent. The king ordered her locked in the chapel under guard. And yet, when morning came, her slippers were worn through, her feet were bleeding, and the 13th pair was laid neatly across her chest. Jacob found her later that morning, crouched in the apse, whispering to the altar. He dared to kneel beside her, not speaking, only listening. Linnea didn't look at him, just traced a circle with her fingertip on the stone. "We used to be 13, she said softly. "She was born dead, or so they told us. But children know." Her voice cracked. Mother never stopped singing to her, even when there was no crib. She sang lullabies into the cracks in the wall, rocked an empty blanket. She said if we didn't love her, she'd be cold, that she'd forget who she was. Jacob felt something twist in his stomach. Linnea continued. "We didn't understand then, but the lullabies, they were more than songs. They were names, doors, and one night, we opened one." She finally turned to look at him. Now she's awake, and she's still cold. The king begged Linnea to reveal how they escaped their rooms. She said nothing more, so he turned again to Jacob. "Name your price," the king rasped. "Stop this." Jacob thought of the 13th step, the bleeding walls, the voice in the crypt. He gave no price. He only asked to speak with Linnea one last time, and together they returned to the chapel, to the wall that pulsed like a wound. Jacob pressed his hand to the stone. This time, it didn't resist. The wall melted away, and beyond it, a stairwell descended into the dark, lined not with torches, but mirrors. Each one showed a different version of Linnea, some dancing, some weeping, and in the last, the 13th mirror, her reflection smiled back, but it was not her. The thing behind the glass was wearing her face, but its smile was too wide, too sharp, and its hands were made of bone. Jacob stared into the 13th mirror, and the thing wearing Linnea's face grinned wider, as though the glass were not a barrier, but an invitation. It lifted a hand, made entirely of bone, and tapped the inside of the mirror with a brittle click. Tap, tap, tap. Linnea recoiled. Don't look into it too long. That's how she gets in. Jacob tore his eyes away. The air had grown heavier. The silence now buzzed with something hungry, as though the walls themselves were waiting. He forced himself to look at the other mirrors again, 12 in total, before the last. Each one distorted the reflection of the princess it showed. He recognized them all. Delia, Mirelle, Isbeth, the twins, Asa and Ilsa, pale-eyed Theda, and the rest. In each mirrored pane, they danced, not joyfully, but endlessly. Their faces were blank, eyes hollow, feet bleeding, as though they were puppets carved from wax, melting slower each night. They've all given her a piece of themselves, Linnea whispered. Jacob turned. What do you mean? She needs us to be real, to stay alive, and to do that, she needs to wear us. Each dance, she takes a little more, a finger, a smile, a dream. I've watched Isbeth forget her own name. Mirelle no longer feels cold. She looked back at the mirror, her eyes full of defiance and despair. I tried to stop dancing. I broke my foot once, threw myself down the stairs. She still made me go. I woke up with a crown of ash and no voice for 3 days. That's when I realized there's no waking from her. Jacob stared at the mirrored hall stretching beyond. It was narrow, suffocating, its ceiling arched with ribs of stone, its floor a slick, black material that swallowed light. He looked down and realized the hallway didn't reflect him at all, only Linnea, and in her shadow a second silhouette followed, smaller, grinning. He drew a dagger from his coat, small, curved, a relic of his grave-digging days. Then let's stop pretending she's your sister. Linnea said nothing. She turned and stepped forward into the mirrored passage. The first footfall echoed like a drumbeat in his bones. The path stretched downward, impossibly far. The mirrors reflected not just the princesses, but moments, memories, half faded and broken. Jacob glimpsed a crib draped in black velvet, a nursemaid clutching a stillborn bundle with 2 long fingers, a crown floating in water, 13 candles, all burning but one. The air warped around them. Jacob's stomach lurched. For a moment, he thought he saw himself in one of the mirrors, but it wasn't him, not exactly. The man in the glass was clean-shaven, eyes brighter, no scars, happy. He blinked, and the image changed. The doppelganger now dancing, bones breaking under the pressure of unseen hands. "Don't look too long," Linnea warned again. "She can make you want to stay." They passed the 12th mirror. The air shifted, and the 13th mirror opened. It wasn't a door. It wasn't glass. It was a mouth, a gaping hole in the world, ringed with teeth made of chandeliers, ribs of marble and obsidian curling inward like a throat. The music was louder here, screeching violins layered with the sound of bare feet, slapping stone, the grind of chains dragging behind silken skirts. Linnea reached out and gripped Jacob's arm. "Don't speak to her," she said. "Don't believe her. She lies in voices that sound like ours." Jacob nodded, and they stepped into the ballroom. It was not a ballroom, not anymore. Once it might have been a place of splendour, gilded columns and glowing chandeliers, velvet drapes and polished floors. But time and something darker had twisted it. The chandeliers now dangled like severed limbs, their crystals bleeding wax that hissed on contact with the floor. The drapes were cobwebs. The floor had faces beneath the stone, mouths open in silent song, and at the centre 12 princesses danced, each circled in slow, jerking rhythm, dresses torn, feet bare and raw. Their eyes were glassy, lips cracked from thirst, but they moved in perfect coordination, puppets on invisible strings. Over them, suspended by threads of hair and silver, was the 13th. She hovered above like a marionette half-born, limbs long and boneless, head cocked at a wrong angle. Her face was Linnea's and Morel's and Jacob's. It changed with each blink, never landing on one, always shifting, always hungry. When she smiled, the music paused. "My guests," she whispered, voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. Linnea fell to her knees. The 13th lowered. Jacob raised his blade. The smile widened. "You brought me a gift," she said sweetly, descending like a spider. "Oh, Linnea, you do still love me." Linnea trembled. "I'm here to end it." The 13th tilted her head. "And what does that mean, dear sister? I am the end. I am the last note of the song. I am the one left out. The lullaby no one sang. The cradle with no name carved above it." She turned to Jacob. "And you've dug so many graves. Why not dig me a new one?" Jacob stepped forward. "I don't bury things alive." "Oh," she crooned, reaching toward him with hands like smoke and splinters. "But I am so alive now." She touched his chest. Jacob screamed. Memories poured from him. Images of his mother's funeral, his brother's laughter, the first girl he kissed beneath a willow tree. They slipped from him like silk torn from the skin, and he staggered, bleeding memory and self. Linnea moved. She didn't have a blade, only her voice. She began to sing. It wasn't beautiful. It was raw, crooked, like an old lullaby hummed through cracked lips. But it was true. Sleep now, little sister, sleep in ash and stone. The 13th froze. The mirrors around the room quivered. The other princesses slowed their dance. Jacob dropped to one knee, gasping. Linnea sang louder. Sleep where no one seeks you. Sleep where roots have grown. Kinkikid. The 13th shrieked, her form splitting, fragmenting, faces spinning like wheels. She lunged at Linnea. Jacob rose and plunged the blade into the mirror behind her. The shatter was deafening. Glass exploded inward, dragging the 13th backward. In a whirlwind of light and shrieking metal, the ballroom trembled. The 12 sisters collapsed as if their strings had been cut. Linnea fell with them. Jacob ran to her. The mirror was gone. So was the 13th. For now. They emerged from the chapel at dawn. The castle was silent. The king met them at the steps of the east wing, eyes hollow, crown askew. "Where are my daughters?" he whispered. Linnea lifted her head. Sleeping, and for the first time in a decade, she meant it. But Jacob looked over his shoulder toward the chapel. He swore he heard music again. Just one note, one step, one giggle, low, soft, wrong. 3 days passed, and the castle did not rejoice. The 12 princesses, if they could still be called that, slept for the first time in months, perhaps years. But they did not wake easily. Their skin remained clammy, their limbs limp, and their breath shallow. Their eyelids flickered like trapped moths, and when they did rouse, it was only for brief moments, eyes blinking at empty walls, hands flinching from unseen strings. Whatever had been broken in the ballroom had left its cracks in them too. The king paced the halls like a man recently exhumed from his own tomb. He did not ask after the 13th any more. He avoided the chapel. He did not look Linnea in the eye. Jacob, on the other hand, searched. He couldn't stop, because the music hadn't stopped either. It was fainter now, yes, but it threaded itself through the castle's walls like a vein seeking a heart. It pulsed at odd times, dawn, dusk, sometimes when no light touched the stones at all. He'd hear it in the click of a spoon against porcelain, in the soft brushing of a broom across old tile, always there, always whispering. One night, he peeled up the floorboards of the princess's chambers again. What he found beneath was not what he remembered. The crawl space had changed, grown. It now twisted deeper, swallowing into darkness that had no architectural justification. Stone gave way to marrow-like material, and at its end sat a door, a child's door, painted white, its surface cracked like an old doll's face, tiny, no taller than Jacob's knees. It had a knob carved into a spiral, 13 loops exactly. Something on the other side breathed. Jacob didn't open it. He ran to Linnea instead. She was awake, just barely, sitting upright, her back pressed to a mound of pillows. Her sisters were scattered in the adjoining rooms, asleep or silent, their faces waxy, mouths twitching from half-finished dreams. Jacob entered without knocking. He no longer cared for decorum. "There's another way down." Linnea turned slowly. Her hair had lost its sheen, her lips cracked, but her eyes, they were sharper than before, like glass hardened by fire. "The door?" she asked. Jacob paused. "You knew?" "It was her first," Linnea whispered. "The one she carved herself, before we ever danced." Jacob sat beside her, voice low. "She's not gone, is she?" Linnea shook her head. "No, just deeper." They sat in silence. Then, without warning, Linnea said, "When we were little, we thought she was imaginary, a secret game. We'd say her name in the dark, write it on walls, and every time, something strange would happen. Spilled milk curdling into teeth, dolls vanishing. A lullaby hummed from nowhere." Jacob felt a chill move down his spine. "She was always with us," Linnea continued. "A piece missing from the puzzle, a shadow with too many fingers. We thought we made her up." Jacob rubbed his temples. "And you didn't?" "No," Linnea said. "She made us." The next morning, Jacob returned to the door. He brought with him chalk, salt, and iron nails. Not weapons, not exactly, but charms, shields, things the old gravediggers spoke of in their cracked, toothed dialects. Whispers from the bones of old burial sites and unblessed soil. He circled the door in chalk, salted its edges, drove an iron nail into the frame, and whispered, "You are not welcome." The door laughed, high, thin, like a little girl hiding under a bed. Jacob stepped back. Behind him, he heard the scuff of bare feet. He turned, expecting Linnea, but it was Asa, one of the twins, or maybe it was Ilsa. He could never quite tell. The girl was pale as chalk, her eyes sunken and bloodless. "She's waiting," she said, in a voice that wasn't hers. "She wants to try on your face next." Then she collapsed. Jacob caught her before her skull hit the stone, but when he looked into her eyes, something looked back. Not the 13th, not exactly, but a shadow of her, a filament of silk, a seed. Jacob shouted for help. None came. Later that night, the king gathered the court's remaining priests, mages and sages. He declared the east wing forbidden, the chapel sealed, and the 13th unspeakable. But Linnea did not obey. She found Jacob again, pulled him aside. "She's still choosing," she said. "One by one. She's not stealing us whole anymore. She's whispering into us, growing from within." Jacob nodded. "A possession?" Linnea flinched. "No, worse." Jacob didn't ask how. He didn't want the answer. They both knew what had to be done. The next day, Jacob descended into the crawl space, with only a lantern and Linnea's last lullaby carved into his memory. The door was still there, but it had grown, no longer knee-high. It now reached his waist. The spiral knob had opened, revealing a keyhole shaped like an open eye. The chalk had been scrubbed away, the salt scattered, and on the door was a message written in milk-white bone dust. I remembered my name. Jacob raised the lantern. The door opened on its own. Beyond was a nursery, but one no child had ever played in. Crib bars made of vertebrae, a rocking horse with antlers, mobiles spun by windless air, dangling bits of teeth and hair. On the wall were 13 drawings, each a charcoal scribble of a girl dancing, her feet turning into roots, her hands into wings, her face blank, except the last. It was Jacob. He stepped inside, and the door closed. Linnea waited for hours, then days. No one heard from Jacob again, until the 4th night, when the chapel bells rang again, though no one pulled the rope, and the maids found a new pair of slippers on Linnea's pillow, men's slippers, worn through and bleeding. There was no wind inside the nursery, no temperature, no scent. Jacob stood motionless beneath the flickering lantern light, watching the mobiles spin. Something about the motion was wrong. They rotated too slowly, too smoothly, like they weren't moving at all, but time itself was warping around them. The air tasted like milk that had gone sour long ago. He stepped forward. The floor creaked beneath him, not with the sharp snap of wood, but the soft crunch of teeth, tiny ones, lined up like tiles. He crouched to inspect them, heart thudding. They were human, children's teeth, hundreds. Jacob stood, bile rising in his throat. In the centre of the room sat the crib. A mobile dangled over it. 13 shapes hung from iron wires, each a miniature face. Princesses, all 12 sisters, and one more, hers, the 13th. And inside the crib, nothing, or so he thought. Then it blinked. 2 glassy eyes opened, too wide, too wet, and a smile, slow and wet and unnatural, peeled across nothing. Jacob staggered back. "You came," said the voice. The air didn't vibrate, the walls didn't echo. The sound was inside him. "I was born from silence," it whispered, "made from the scraps of lullabies. I learned to crawl through cracks, through breath, through dreams." Jacob's mouth was dry. He tried to speak and couldn't. "You were kind to the dead," the voice said. "You buried them with care. You honoured them." From the shadows behind the crib, she unfolded the 13th, fully formed now, no longer hovering, no longer mist. She stood, tall, too tall, her limbs just slightly too long, her head slightly too small, her hair curled like smoke, her skin the grey of milk left in moonlight, and her face, it was his, not perfectly, but enough, twisted and wrong, lips too wide, eyes weeping constantly, though she did not blink. "You carry silence," she said, stepping toward him. "You make room for it. You're the first man who's heard me." Jacob gripped the dagger at his side. "No," he rasped. "I hear the dead. You're not them." "I'm everything they left behind," she whispered. "I'm what's forgotten. I'm what should have been loved." He lunged. She didn't flinch. She opened. Her chest unzipped like silk being torn, revealing a chasm of mirrors and memories. Jacob's dagger passed through her, as if through fog. In an instant, he was elsewhere, not in the nursery, but in a hallway of mirrors, infinite and shifting. Each mirror showed a moment. A girl tying her slippers, a boy burying his dog in a wooden box, a mother rocking an empty cradle, a king sealing a door, tears wet on his cheeks, and then Jacob in a grave, covered in ash. The 13th crouched over him, singing. "Stop," he choked, turning. But there was no end to the mirrors, and all of them were filling with her, back in the waking world, or what remained of it. Linnea paced the floor. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. The king was drinking now, constantly. Half the castle had left in the night, servants refusing to stay a moment longer, and the slippers kept coming. Each night, one more pair, all men's, all bleeding. She'd counted 5 so far. Jacob was the 6th. Tonight would be the 7th. She knew what she had to do. Linnea pulled open the drawer where she'd hidden her old slippers. They were heavier than she remembered, and warm. She slid them on. The moment she did, the music began, but not the old ballroom tune. No, this was a nursery lullaby, crooked and broken, sung by a voice too tired to finish it. Linnea stepped toward the fireplace, where the hidden lever once lay, except it was already open. The floor beneath her creaked, and from the shadows, her own reflection stepped out. It was her face, but younger, with eyes too old. "I want to come back," said the reflection. "I want to dance again." Linnea did not scream. She leapt forward and shattered it. The sound rang out like glass exploding inside her skull. The mirrors, wherever they were, heard it and cracked. Jacob dropped to his knees. The mirrors around him were shattering. Each broken pane released a howl, like a child crying into a pit. The images blurred, the memories faded, the faces, his, hers, the king's, the queen's, all melted into one another. The 13th screamed, and for the first time it was a child's scream, not ancient, not monstrous, a scream of pure aching grief. Jacob stood. He didn't speak. He sang Linnea's lullaby, the same tune she'd sung in the ballroom. He sang it, voice rough and cracking, but steady, and the mirrors around him, what few remained, sang back. Then he was in the crib again. The 13th was a shadow, smaller now, not formed. She looked up at him, no longer grinning, just sad. "Why didn't he want me?" she whispered. Jacob sat beside the crib. He placed the dagger on the floor. "Because he was afraid." She looked at him. "Will you bury me?" she asked. Jacob nodded. Yes. And when he opened his eyes, he was back in the chapel, The princesses were waking. Their feet were whole. The music had stopped. At last, that morning, the king held a ceremony. He didn't know why, only that he was compelled to do it. Jacob led them to the east wing, to the room with no name, to the crawl space. There, beneath the floor, they dug. They found the bones, small, wrapped in a scrap of silk that had once been royal blue. No coffin, no marker, no blessing. Jacob placed the bones in a new cradle, this one carved of oak and lined with violet flowers. Linnea placed the final slipper inside it, and the 13th was finally laid to rest. This time they rang the bells 13 times. That night no one danced, not in the castle, not beneath it, but as Jacob drifted to sleep in the servants' quarters, a breeze passed through the window, and in it a voice, soft, gentle. Thank you. It should have ended with the burial. That's what Jacob told himself. That's what they all hoped. The princesses began to heal, not fully, not quickly, but there was life behind their eyes again. Linnea walked freely now, though her steps still bore the cautious weight of someone who had danced through nightmares. The others, Delia, Isbeth, Asa, Ilsa, all resumed their routines, fragmented and dazed, like birds forgetting how to sing, but remembering the shape of flight. Jacob kept to the periphery. The king offered him land, gold, a title. He declined. He was still waiting for the echoes to fade. But then the bell rang again, on the 13th day, just once, low, wrong, dragging out so long it frayed into silence and returned again, distorted. Jacob was the first to hear it, but not the last. Linnea came to his chambers that night, face pale, trembling. She didn't speak, just handed him something wrapped in silk. It was a baby's rattle, old, rusted, still warm. The next day, a gardener was found dead beside the east wing's hedgerow. His body was pale, twisted, curled into the fetal position. Both ears had been torn out. Stuffed in his pocket was a piece of parchment, one word, scrawled in black charcoal. Listen. Jacob stood over the corpse with the priest, the king's steward, and 2 guards. The king refused to come. Linnea did. She didn't speak until the others left. Then she whispered, "She's not angry anymore." Jacob turned. "What do you mean?" "She's curious." The castle slowly turned, not all at once, not with blood or fire, but in subtle ways. The wind no longer came from outside. It flowed inward from the east wing, even when the windows were closed. Nails curled in the wood of doors and beds, mirrors fogged when no one breathed. Children born in nearby villages cried when brought near the castle gates, and the bell tower, it rang every 13th night. Each time one person vanished, always someone who had denied her name, a scullery maid who refused to wash the 13th cup, a steward who insisted there were only 12 princesses, a priest who had closed the chapel door too tightly, all gone. Their shoes were always left behind, worn through. Jacob grew thin. He didn't sleep, not deeply. He roamed the castle at night, lantern in hand, retracing the path to the nursery that no longer existed. Beneath the floorboards, the crawl space was sealed, but the feeling remained. Some nights he heard laughter in the walls. Other nights it was weeping. Once he opened a cupboard and found 13 dolls, seated in a circle. None of them had eyes, and in the centre sat a thimble filled with blood, still warm. Linnea began writing letters, not to anyone living. She wrote to the 13th, small notes, folded into petals, hidden beneath her pillow. Jacob found one while checking her chamber after a bad dream left her screaming. It read, "I'm sorry we forgot you. We were too young. We didn't know what silence could do." Another read, "You can't stay here. You were never meant to live in echoes." One night, Jacob caught her placing a letter into the old chapel wall, pressing it into the cracks with trembling hands. He didn't stop her. He did the same. His letter said, "We buried you with care. Let that be enough." The next day, the mirror in the entryway shattered, not cracked, not broken, imploded. The servants found hundreds of splinters, each reflecting different things. A dancer's silhouette, a crown made of worms, Jacob's childhood bedroom, Linnea asleep in a crib far too small, the king's face, eyes sewn shut. They burned the pieces, but the reflections stayed. On the 13th week, Linnea woke to find her slippers missing. Jacob searched her room, frantic, but they were nowhere, until they checked the nursery again. It had returned, no longer beneath the floorboards, but fully formed at the end of a hallway that had not existed the day before. The door was ajar. Inside, the rattle sat in the crib. The slippers were there too, lined neatly on the floor. 13 pairs, 12 women's, 1 man's. Jacob stepped inside. "Don't," Linnea whispered, grabbing his sleeve. He turned to her, and she was crying. "She wants to dance again." Jacob looked down. The floor beneath them was pulsing, like a heartbeat or a womb. Later, Jacob made a choice. He locked the nursery door, nailed it shut, carved a sigil into the wood, salted the floor. Then he took his spade and dug one final hole, a grave, deep beneath the chapel, big enough for bones that could not rest. When he was finished, he stood inside the hole and whispered, "Enough." Then he lay down. Linnea found him there the next morning, not dead, but asleep. She tried to wake him. He wouldn't stir, but he was smiling, at peace. In his hand was a note, scrawled in his own hand. "She's learning how to rest." The bell didn't ring that night, for the first time in 13 weeks. And in the morning, no new slippers, no blood, just silence. The good kind, the kind that waits for dawn, and nothing more. The silence held for 13 nights. No bell tolled, No new shoes appeared, no one vanished, no laughter in the walls, no lullabies curled in dust. The king began to walk the halls again, though his steps were slow and tentative, like an intruder in his own home. He paused often in front of portraits, especially the one of the Queen, long dead, the original mother, the only one who had ever held the 13th in her arms. Jacob did not wake. He remained in the chapel crypt, resting in the grave he had dug. His chest rose and fell steadily, and a faint smile curled his lips. He looked younger. The lines in his face softened. The scar on his brow faded to near nothing. No physician could explain it. Linnea kept watch. Each day she brought fresh flowers, 13 of them, every time. Marigolds, lilies, foxglove, thistle. She whispered lullabies into the air above his body and placed notes beside his folded hands. Sometimes the notes disappeared, other times they returned, rewritten in a strange, curling hand. They never said much, just a word or two, listening, trying, almost. On the 13th day of Jacob's sleep, Linnea brought him a bundle of dark thread. It wasn't cloth or wool. It was a black thread she'd pulled from her own dreams. She had woken with it clenched in her fist, its fibres twitching like a living thing. She had no idea what it was for until she laid it across Jacob's chest, and he exhaled a long, slow breath. Then the thread vanished, swallowed by the air or by something deeper. Linnea didn't ask questions anymore. Elsewhere in the castle, things remained strange. The nursery door stayed sealed, but occasionally the servants found notes outside it, written in a child's hand, misspelled, scrawled in ink that smelled faintly of milk and grave dust. I am learning, I am making. Who was first? Who was mother? What is birth if no one waits? The king ordered the notes burned. Linnea kept them. She stored them in a small box beneath her bed. She didn't show anyone, not even Jacob, when he stirred in his sleep and muttered things like, "She has fingers now," or "Tell her the stars are only cold fire." Each morning, Linnea counted the stars embroidered into her sleeves. There were only ever 12, until the 14th day. Then there were 13. She ran to Jacob's crypt and found him gone. There was no sign of struggle, no footprints, no broken door, just an empty grave and a note folded into the indentation where his body had rested. It read, "Cradles are not cages." Beneath it was another scrap of paper. It was older, brittle, yellowed with age, a birth certificate, unfinished. It read, "Name, Mother, Queen Adelheid, date, stillborn, buried, redacted." At the bottom, a single word had been added in the black chalk, Iselda. The king did not react well. When Linnea presented the birth record, he struck it from her hands. "That name is forbidden," he hissed. voice trembling. She was not meant to be. Linnea stood firm. She was. We're the ones who weren't ready. She was cursed. He spat. You don't know what it did to her. I do, she said. I saw it. Linnea looked the king in the eye, no longer afraid of his crown or grief. She wasn't cursed. She was unloved. There's a difference. And then she turned and walked away. She never spoke to him again. That night, the bell rang only once, and not from the tower, from the cradle. Linnea followed the sound down the east wing, past the forbidden halls, past the room where the 13th pair of slippers had first appeared, past the mirror, still shattered, past the walls still humming. The nursery door stood open. Inside, the crib was empty. No rattle, no mobiles, no teeth, just Jacob, standing in the centre, eyes open, alive, but changed. He was dressed in black. His hands were pale. He looked at her as though seeing her from a great distance. She's building something, he said. What? A name, Jacob said. A self, a way to belong. He lifted his hand. 13 threads were tied around his fingers. Each one pulsed with its own rhythm. She's not taking any more, Jacob said. She's returning. Pieces, memories, echoes. She's giving them back. Linnea stepped forward, heart pounding. You went inside her. Jacob smiled softly. No, she let me hold her hand. She's still learning. Linnea began to cry. Jacob did too, but not for sorrow. For the first time in a long, long while, the castle was warm. From that night forward, a new tradition began in Veldenmoor. Each year, on the 13th night of autumn, a quiet vigil is held in the chapel. No candles, no prayers, just silence, and a single cradle placed at the altar, filled with flowers, thread, and shoes, and always a lullaby, not sung aloud, but heard in the heart, a song for the child who waited so long to be welcomed. Years passed. The castle of Veldenmoor changed, not in the way that kingdoms often do, not with war or famine or fire, but in the slow, strange way that places touched by grief begin to soften. The marble halls no longer echoed with dread. The shadows no longer whispered in the voice of something forgotten. The mirrors stayed whole. The slippers stayed intact. And the east wing, once feared, sealed, and marked as cursed, was opened again. But now it served a new purpose, a place for remembering. The nursery remained, though it had grown warmer. Its iron mobiles were replaced with carvings of swans and stars. The crib was cleaned, draped in white linen, and above it, on the wall, hung a single word. Iselda. She had a name now. Jacob lived in the castle still, not as a servant, not as a noble. He lived as her keeper, not to trap her, not to guard against her, but to speak to her, to teach her. He spent his days writing stories on long scrolls of paper, fables, lullabies, tales with no endings, and feeding them through the nursery window, which opened now onto a small balcony surrounded by thornless roses. He never saw her face again, but he heard her in the rustle of parchment as it vanished from the floor, in the soft giggle carried on the wind, in the way the threads of reality stopped unravelling. She no longer pulled, she wove. Linnea became queen. The king, her father, abdicated quietly, worn by sorrow, haunted by memory. He retired to the cloistered gardens and was rarely seen again. Under Linnea's rule, the kingdom thrived. She was not known for wars or taxes or treaties. She was known for mourning rites. Under her reign, the forgotten were given names. Stillbirths were recorded. Graves were marked. Priests were taught to bless silence, not just sound. The royal seamstresses embroidered 13 stars on all state garments. Children were taught the lullaby that once held back the dark. It was not a song of fear, it was a song of remembrance, and on the 13th night of every month, the castle opened its gates. People came bearing offerings, a broken shoe, a thread from a wedding dress never worn, a page from a diary no one finished, a lullaby no one else remembered. These were laid in the cradle, not to summon her, but to thank her for staying quiet, for staying kind, for letting go. Jacob grew old. He walked the halls slowly now, spine bent, eyes dim but thoughtful. Still, each morning he climbed the nursery steps, lit a candle, and whispered, "Good morning, Iselda." Some days the flame flickered in response. Some days a strand of black thread appeared on the sill. He never asked for more. He only gave thanks. Once, on a spring morning with no clouds, Linnea found him asleep in the rocking chair beside the crib. A letter sat in his lap. It read, "She dreamed of a place where no one danced alone." He never woke again. They buried him in the chapel crypt, beside the empty cradle that once held her bones. Not in the nursery, but near her heartbeat. His gravestone bore no titles, just Jacob the Kind. He listened. Linnea wept at the funeral, not with despair, with completion. Something long unfinished was now whole. On the last day of Linnea's life, she sat in the east wing, now remade as a sanctuary. She closed her eyes and hummed the lullaby one final time. As she did, wind stirred around her. A voice, still young, still soft, whispered in return, "I remember you." And Linnea smiled. She did not fear death, because now, when children were born in Veldenmoor, they were taught this. Once there were 13 princesses. 12 danced in silver halls. 1 danced in silence, waiting to be named. And when she was, the kingdom began to heal.